At least 10 people have been killed after an attack at Turkey's largest airport tonight. There were 2 explosions thought to be suicide bombers and gunfire at Istanbul's Ataturk International Airport. Around 60 people have been injured, some of them critically. All flights at the airport have been suspended. We'll have the latest. Also on the programme. David Cameron is in Brussels talking to EU leaders for the first time since Britain voted out. He says it's not the time to turn our back on Europe.
I very much hope we'll seek the closest possible relationship in terms of trade and cooperation and security, because that is good for us and that is good for them.
The head of the European Commission and Nigel Farage shared a quiet word before bad-tempered exchanges in public.
I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union. You all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you?
You were fighting for the exit. The British people voted in favour of the exit. Why are you here?
Jeremy Corbyn says he will not stand down as Labour leader despite an overwhelming vote of no confidence by his MPs. A miserable return home for the England team after one of the most humiliating defeats in their history. And how David Hockney has turned to family, friends and acquaintances for his latest exhibition.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, Andy Murray wins the Battle of the Brits at Wimbledon. He's through in straight sets in his first round match against Liam Brody.
Good evening. There have been 2 explosions and gunfire tonight at Istanbul's Ataturk International Airport. Turkish government officials say at least 10 people have been killed in the attack. Around 60 people are reported to have been injured, some of them critically. Here, the Foreign Office say they are urgently seeking further information about the attack. Turkish officials say they believe at least one of the explosions was a suicide bomber. It's the latest in a string of attacks on Turkey's biggest city. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale.
The scene tonight at Istanbul's Ataturk Airport. Passengers taking cover after 2 explosions tore through the international departure terminal. Outside, people fled after at least one of the attackers reportedly opened fire with a Kalashnikov machine gun before blowing himself up after being fired on by the police. Officials said that at least 60 people had been wounded, many waiting outside until the ambulances arrived, as others who had been injured emerged. Police rushed to set up a perimeter around the airport after the attacks. Turkey's Justice Minister said at least 10 people had been killed. This is only the latest in a series of deadly attacks in Turkey this year, often blamed on either Kurdish separatists or the so-called Islamic State group. But this is the first time that the international airport has been targeted, and for now, flights in and out of the airport are currently suspended. Tonight, as the injured were taken to hospital, the question is what more Turkey can do to deal with a security situation that's getting worse and not better. James Landale, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Mark Lowen is at Istanbul's Ataturk Airport. Mark, you're actually on a plane. You've just landed there. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, Sophie, I just landed this evening about an hour and a half ago on a flight from Nice, and we are being kept, of course, on board the plane, not allowed to disembark because of what is happening inside the airport and the carnage there. We're hearing that at least 2 explosions, possibly 3, around the international terminal area, one possibly in the car park as well. We understand that one of the attackers, as you heard in James's report, opened fire with a Kalashnikov before blowing himself up with a suicide belt. We understand there are reports that one of them was wrestled to the ground by police officers as well. We're not being told when we're going to be allowed to leave the aircraft, of course. For the time being, there's been no claim of responsibility, but as James was saying, Turkey has been really in the grip of a terrible spiral of violence in the last year. Some attacks blamed on so-called Islamic State, including one earlier this month, some on Kurdish militants, including a mortar attack at Istanbul's second airport, Sabiha Gökçen Airport, back in December, that was claimed by Kurdish militants, a group calling itself TAK. Now, I have to say, Sophie, that I have lived here for 2 years, and I have often thought, coming into this airport, that it is a potentially vulnerable place, and that an attack could take place here because cars are really not searched very often coming into the airport area. That said, as you come into the terminal building, there are X-ray machines and scanners for anybody coming in, even before the check-in desks. And so what appears to have happened tonight is that the attackers appear to have breached the perimeter of the airport, managed to get in towards the terminal building, and there they have set off their attacks with such tragic consequences.
Mark Learn on the tarmac there at Istanbul Airport. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will, of course, bring you the latest on that story as it develops. David Cameron has been attending talks in Brussels today with the European leaders following the UK's decision to leave the European Union. He said it was not the time for Britain to turn its back on Europe. Well, Fiona is in Brussels for us tonight. Fiona.
Sophie, thank you, and good evening from Brussels, where it's been a day of some considerable political drama. When the Prime Minister arrived earlier on, he said he hoped the discussions would be constructive. But there's no disguising the tension and frustrations here. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, said Britain couldn't cherry-pick the parts of the EU it wants, such as access to the single market. And the UKIP leader, Nigel Farage, was booed in an acrimonious session of the European Parliament. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, has our first report.
David Cameron might have wanted to slip in the back after his plan went so wrong. The Prime Minister made the same grand arrival as ever, with a lot of explaining to do.
While we're leaving the European Union, we mustn't be turning our backs on Europe. These countries are our neighbours, our friends, our allies, our partners, and I very much hope we'll seek the closest possible relationship in terms of trade and cooperation and security, because that is good for us and that is good for them. And that's the spirit in which the discussions, I think, will be held today.
He told us and them he wouldn't quit if he lost and would start the process of leaving straight away. He's doing the opposite. No surprise the President of the Commission didn't want to stop and chat. There is genuine upset and a desire to get on with it.
The day after Brexit, I felt as if someone very close to me had left our home. Brexit, it's not only about procedures, about politics, about interest. It is also about our emotions and feelings.
What are you going to say to Prime Minister Cameron?
I think he needs to say something to us, not us to him.
I think we should not wait until the Conservative Party has solved its internal problems. Not a whole continent can wait for it.
Nothing can happen, though, till Britain is ready to start, says Europe's most powerful politician.
Sometimes these bun fights are all about working out the body language, trying to find out what's going on. Well, it's crystal clear this time. Britain feels alone, very alone. Europe's leaders are sad and angry, almost in disbelief at what's been decided, and in no mood to make the exit process easy.
But so many British voters felt the EU didn't listen. Nigel Farage wanted to enjoy the warm embrace of Schadenfreude, delighted at Brussels' agony.
Good morning. Good morning.
Mutual loathing in the European Parliament today was pretty clear.
Funny, isn't it? You know, when I came here 17 years ago, and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you?
There's not just upset at the result, but contempt for how the referendum was won.
You lied. You didn't tell the truth. You fabricated reality.
After 6 years, David Cameron's job is not to make the deal. But from the look on their faces, he has first to explain himself and our democratic decision. This will probably be one for the album. It's likely to be his last Brussels get-together. There's uncertainty about the basic blocks of our future relationship. Commiseration too, alongside the deep confusion and hard work to do tonight. But David Cameron is no longer here to be the one who decides. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Brussels.
Well, as we heard there was an angry debate in a special session of the European Parliament on the referendum result. Our Europe correspondent Damien Grammaticus reports now on the reaction of MEPs from across the European Union to the UK's vote to leave.
Across town from where Europe's leaders were meeting, a British winner in Brussels today.
Well, the next step.
Nigel Farage preparing to savour his moment of triumph over the EU and its institutions. The President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, today banned his staff from having any negotiations with British officials until the UK gives notice it's exiting the Union. Now, after staying silent throughout the referendum, Europe's politicians held little back.
The worst liars can be found among UKIP. On Friday, Nigel Farage said publicly that the promised £350 million a week would finally not go to the National Health Service. It had all been a lie. I asked Mr. Farage, if you had an ounce of decency in you, you would apologise today to the British. Shame on you.
Most here are, of course, believers in Europe's project, shocked by the outcome, but also by the tone of Britain's referendum debate.
What makes it so hard for me, and I think also for the other group's leader and for everybody here in this House, is the way it succeeded. The absolute negative campaign. The posters of Mr. Farage showing refugees like in Nazi propaganda because they copied it at that moment.
He replied with scorn of his own.
I know that virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives.
The chamber had to be called to order.
The reason you're so angry has been perfectly clear from all the angry exchanges this morning. You, as a political project, are in denial. You're in denial that your currency is failing.
That drew jeers, but some shared Nigel Farage's views.
Our British friends' vote in favour of leaving the European Union is by far the most important event in our continent since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's a signal of freedom sent out to the entire world.
Then came this, an impassioned Scottish plea to Europe.
Colleagues, there is a lot of things to be negotiated. We will need cool heads and warm hearts. But please remember this. Scotland did not let you down. Please, I beg you, chers collègues, do not let Scotland down now.
The ovation a sign that sentiment now has considerable sympathy here. For Nigel Farage, this is the culmination of a lifetime's political project to get the UK out of the EU. What we heard from the European side is they want talks now to begin as soon as possible. And there will be, they say, no favours, no cherry-picking by Britain in those. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Brussels.
Well, our political editor Laura Kunsberg is here and our Europe editor Katya Adler. Laura, the talks have just broken up. David Cameron has emerged after 3.5 hours with his fellow European leaders. What's he had to say?
Well, it's probably his last time that he'll sit down with his EU counterparts and chew the fat over dinner. The Prime Minister's main job was really to try to smooth the path for whoever his successor is, and he has stressed that he wants there to be a constructive period of talks now. But in particular, what he said was that the UK and the EU should have as close economic ties as is possible, even with the UK outside the European Union. But for that to happen, he's basically said that the rest of the EU will have to look at changing the rules around freedom of movement, changing the rules around immigration. Of course, during the referendum campaign, that was one of the most contentious things that many voters perhaps wanted to hear from him. During the campaign, he wasn't really willing to go that far, although others did. But tonight, here in Brussels, that is what he's laid out, almost as a precondition of the UK's next relationship with the European Union outside the EU. Of course, many people probably sitting around the table will have thought, you fought a referendum, you asked us all for special conditions, we gave you those special conditions. What right do you really have to lay down new demands now?
Certainly, Katia, when it comes to hearing what the European leaders have had to say as they've arrived, no one has given the impression that they're particularly keen on agreeing to any new preconditions, and in fact expressing frustration at the delay from Britain in starting the divorce proceedings, if you like, invoking Article 50.
Well, yes, I mean, the atmosphere here, we have to say, first of all, is, it was calm, it was polite, nothing like those stormy scenes that we saw in the European Parliament. But yes, that is what EU leaders have been saying to David Cameron. Your country voted out. We now want to get on with it. And it's really through gritted teeth that they've said to him also they realise that the UK needs some time, because under EU rules, the ball is now in Britain's court. It has to officially notify the EU that it wants to leave, and only then negotiations can start. It's called Article 50 in EU speak. But we heard also from Angela Merkel, the very influential German Chancellor, today, and she said, when those talks start, Britain can't cherry pick its way to a deal. She basically dismissed the idea that Britain can have good access to the internal market and at the same time restrict EU immigration. She said, if Britain, like Norway, wants to have access to the single market in this key way, it will have to accept the freedom of movement. So they were very clear about that, and then about another thing as well, that in this waiting period, this interim period, EU leaders say there'll be no cosy backroom chats, no informal talks about this future deal with the UK. That's the only pressure they can exert right now on Britain, because they really do want those formal negotiations to start as soon as is practically possible.
Katia and Laura, thank you both very much. Well, back home on the financial markets, there's been some respite from the turmoil seen in the immediate aftermath of the EU referendum. The value of the pound has risen, as has the FTSE 100 share index, adding more than £40 billion to the value of companies. The Chancellor George Osborne has said tax rises and cuts in public spending are inevitable after the UK's decision to leave the EU. He said predictions about the impact on finances have started to be borne out by events, and that it's clear that the country is going to be poorer. And in the United States, President Barack Obama says there is no need for a hysterical reaction to Britain's vote to leave. Mr. Obama said, while cataclysmic changes are unlikely, a pause button has been pressed on full European integration. And that's it here from Brussels tonight. There's, of course, much more about Brexit and all the referendum details on our website. That's at bbc.co.uk/news. But from Brussels, here this evening, Sophie, it's back to you.
Fiona, thank you. And let's just give you an update on that attack at Istanbul's Ataturk airport. In the last few minutes, the governor of Istanbul has now said that at least 28 people have been killed. Around 60 have been injured, some critically. And the authorities are now saying that they believe that 3 suicide bombers carried out the attack at the airport this evening. We will, of course, go back to that story at the end of the programme. Jeremy Corbyn has insisted he will not step down as Labour leader despite losing an overwhelming vote of no confidence by 172 votes to 40. A secret ballot of Labour MPs was held this afternoon following the resignation of more than 50 of his most senior colleagues over the last 2 days. But Mr Corbyn said resigning would be a betrayal of all the party members who voted for him last year. Our deputy political editor John Pienaar reports.
Bad idea, this photo. Jeremy Corbyn's uncomfortable, defiant but under siege. A shadow cabinet patched together after mass resignations. What were his advisers thinking?
Seamus, I'm not sure this is a great idea.
Hard to blame him. Just look at his deputy, Tom Watson, on the right. Everyone knows he's not truly backing his leader and may, just may, run for his job.
Can we do something later on, OK?
Yeah, it's fine, yeah, OK. But later on, most of his MPs were officially against him, leaving his team, empty chairs and unfilled vacancies and all, waiting for the leadership challenge that will now surely come. And it's not just MPs. The revolt has spread to Scotland too.
If I had just lost 80% of my parliamentary colleagues, I simply could not do my job. And I think it's now extremely difficult for Jeremy Corbyn to continue.
Harriet Harman. Okay, you're lobbying her.
But Mr Corbyn has strong support in the country. Young members turned up today to urge rebels to back off.
I do not think in any way that the public will understand why we have chosen to turn in on ourselves at the very time when we should have been attacking this government for the chaos that they've wreaked on Britain.
Angela Eagle resigned yesterday as Shadow Business Secretary. Now she's weighing up a leadership challenge. And even though she'll face a battle with her local party members, she believes she may be better able than Tom Watson to unify a party that's been torn apart. In the coming Labour leadership contest, a challenger needs backing from 50 Labour MPs or MEPs from the European Parliament. The contest results announced at the autumn conference or an emergency conference beforehand. It's still unclear if Mr Corbyn would automatically get on the ballot without needing nominations. Voting is by party members, registered supporters who've paid £3 each and affiliated union supporters. Are party members like these young Labourites in Croydon beginning to desert Jeremy Corbyn?
I ended up voting for him in the leadership election because I felt that we needed change and we needed to create a nicer, kinder Labour Party. But increasingly I've become disillusioned and disappointed with decisions he's made.
There's so many people who say the same thing, that he's a lovely guy, really nice guy, and he's different, but he can't be a leader.
It's almost irresponsible for them to advocate for a new leader when he has the vote of the people.
They were wrong then and they're wrong now!
A pro-Corbyn rally in Leeds tonight. It's this kind of support that keeps him going. Some MPs are clinging to the hope that he may yet be forced out by a collapse of trade union backing, say. But his most fervent admirers, like Jeremy Corbyn himself, seem determined to fight on, whatever the cost. And Sophie, the country is mired in doubts and confusion, a government lacking direction, an economy at risk. A rather rain-sodden pro-EU mass demonstration in Parliament Square behind me broke up just a short while ago. But the Labour Party has all but ceased to function as a credible, coherent force in British politics. And the realisation is dawning on both sides of the great Labour divide that they may just not recover at all from the civil war, which now seems to be entirely unstoppable.
And of course, Labour not the only party now with a leadership battle.
That's so. And Britain's future relationships with Europe, with the wider world, they're in a state of suspension until the new leader is chosen. And the Tory party membership aren't just choosing a new leader for their party, they're choosing a new Prime Minister for the country. So the whole process has been put on fast forward. There'll be a lineup of candidates by noon on Thursday. There'll be a new Prime Minister by September the 9th. As for the runners, well, Boris Johnson and Theresa May, they look like the front runners, but it could be a crowded field. Stephen Crabb, the Work and Pension Secretary, looks like declaring tomorrow, and you'll be hearing other names like Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, people like Liam Fox from the right of the party. As I say, a crowded field, and whoever comes out in front of that field, whoever wins this contest, will set a new direction for Britain in the light of the EU historic referendum result.
And what about questions over whether there could be an early general election?
Well, those questions are real, Sophie. They are active, and why is that? Well, the new Prime Minister will be bringing in a new programme with a wafer-thin majority. If the Labour Party is much weakened after their contest for the leadership, a snap election may turn out to be absolutely irresistible. Worth noting that Boris Johnson has said he wouldn't be interested in a snap election, but of course Prime Ministers, if he is a Prime Minister, can change their mind. And these Tory leadership contests down the decades have had a strange way of defying the betting at the outset of the contest.
John Pienaar in Westminster, thank you. England's football team have flown home after they crashed out of Euro 2016 following their shock defeat against Iceland. Roy Hodgson, who resigned immediately after the match, described last night's performance as a one-off event. Our sports editor Dan Roan asks what went wrong and who the next England manager could be.
Got a message for the fans, Roy?
It was a new low. Defeated, deflated, humiliated. England left Nice this morning a national embarrassment, still reeling from the most infamous loss in their history. Hours later, the team's underachieving millionaires returning to their luxury hotel in Chantilly for the final time. Out of Euro 2016, headphones on and with nothing to say. Roy Hodgson, who quit as manager in the immediate aftermath of the defeat to Iceland, reluctantly facing the media.
I don't think I've got anything to say to you that is any different to what
you know already or that you're writing already. But I was not forced to come here. I did so because I've never shirked a press conference. I've never run away from anybody. I've answered questions for 4 years. We're sorry that we couldn't give them the results that they were hoping for.
At times struggling to contain his emotions, Hodgson's pain was obvious.
One particularly bad game has caused a lot of damage to me personally, to the team, and even to the team going forward, because now they've got a major bridge to repair, which had we played better last night, maybe would not have needed repairing.
England's abject performance against rank outsiders Iceland, who have lit up their first ever major tournament, plumbed new depths. The 2-1 winners' togetherness putting shambolic England to shame and leaving them stunned.
The worst England performance I've ever seen. There was no fight, there was no heart, there was no passion. And the ability just wasn't there, the ability to perform under pressure. Players couldn't do it. We caved. The manager caved.
Here's why last night was such a shock. England's population dwarfs tiny Iceland's 330,000. Hodgson earned £3.5 million a year. That's 10 times more than counterpart Heimir Hallgrimsson, a part-time dentist. And while the Premier League is the world's richest, the Icelandic top flight has no fully professional teams. Meanwhile, footage has emerged on social media of England's defeat being wildly celebrated by the Welsh squad, who later said they were merely excited for the underdogs. Wales are now the only home nation left at the Euros, so why do England always seem to fail when it matters most? England wanted for nothing here in France, but they leave having been reduced to a laughing stock. The FA say they're prepared to consider a foreign coach as Hodgson's successor, but after a failure that no longer comes as any surprise, the sense is that it will take a lot more than a new manager if England is ever to have a team it can be truly proud of.
When it comes down to the games that matters, we haven't delivered, and that's not just a recent thing, that's been a 50-year thing. And we've got to figure it out. So it is more than, I think, purely the skill and the tactics. That to my mind, there's clearly something around the psychological preparation and resilience, which is also important.
Until last night, this loss to the part-timers of the United States in 1950 had been the benchmark for England at rock bottom. And 2 years ago, Hodgson was in charge when his team crashed out of the Brazil World Cup in just 5 days. But now this chastened team has outdone them all. Back on home soil this evening after a defeat they will never live down. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Chantilly.
A report into Islamophobia in the UK has found that Muslim hate crime is most likely to be carried out by teenagers and that women are more likely to be attacked than men. The report, to be launched tomorrow by the monitoring group Tell Mama, was worked on by the late MP Jo Cox. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas has more. His report contains language which some viewers may find offensive.
So I'm here in Parliament with Tell Mama,
a campaign she never finished.
We've just had a really exciting conversation about what I can do to help tackle Islamophobia locally.
Tomorrow, Jo Cox would have spoken up for British Muslim women to say too many face racial abuse.
I'm born and bred here. I don't think I should be refused to be entered into a shop or be abused for the way I look.
2 generations of the same family. Halema, a dentist, Rosie, a politics student, and Shanaz, an artist, and all have faced hate. What's this done to you?
Done to me now? Now I feel like I can laugh off an incident. Oh, Mum, guess what happened to me today? Someone else told me I should go back to where I came from. Someone else told me I stink. Someone else says I'm a dirty packy. Just laugh it off. It's when I get told I'm Bin Laden's niece.
Well, yeah, when did that happen?
That was in London. This man barges into me, and as a northerner, I'm like, oh, can you just please say sorry? And the man just looks at me, oh, shut up, you're Bin Laden's niece, you bloody terrorist.
And that's my problem with hatred and racism and Islamophobia and bigotry, because it's all the easy targets. And the easy targets are women, children, older men and women.
Veils being pulled off, women being told, get out of this country.
Fires Mughal worked with Jo Cox. Tomorrow, both would have presented the report in Parliament to warn of the damage being done.
It has impacts on their families. It has impacts on the way their sons perceive what is taking place with their mother. It gives or creates an environment where a victim mentality can take root. And once that happens, Islamist narratives can also take root.
Those most at risk, the report says, are Muslim women wearing Islamic dress. Some here say it's changing how they live.
When I'm picking the children up from mosque, I'd rather they come in the car rather than walking, you know. I have to think twice going into town at certain times.
What have you read on social media?
Just that Muslims are to blame. If it wasn't for them, if they weren't in our country, things would be different.
This report focused on Muslims, but many face intolerance. Police say hate crime for all religions across England and Wales has risen by more than 40% in a year.
Don't let it get me down.
And for those living with that hate, the question, why?
Because I don't get why people can treat me that way. I haven't done anything to these people. They just hate me.
I just don't think it's fair for people to make people feel like this. We're all human beings, we're all here to help each other and make the world a better place.
Ed Thomas, BBC News.
The Queen has visited the famous stones of the Giant's Causeway as part of her 90th birthday tour of Northern Ireland. The visit marks her first public engagement since the UK voted to leave the EU. The Queen held a number of political meetings, although all parties refused to confirm whether Brexit was discussed. Wimbledon now, and Andy Murray returned to centre court today. That's the good news. The bad news is he was facing a fellow Brit, Liam Brodie. Also in action was British #1 Johanna Konta. From the All England club, Joe Wilson reports.
Well, there is the flag, as clear as you'll get. But today there was Britain on both sides of the net. They may look similar. That's Liam Brodie, the wild card. Here's Andy Murray, the ace. 15 long. You can tell them apart because Murray is right-handed and he was the one in control. Expending as little energy as possible is the key to the first week. 6-2 the first set, 6-3 the second. Ranked 235 in the world, but here's a glimpse of what Brodie, the lefty, can do. Facing a British opponent here was new for Murray, but he's never lost a first-round match at Wimbledon. Nice match point. 6-4 in the third. So far, so familiar. Well, when you study the order of play for today, there may be something that reminds you of the past. Not him. For the first time since the mid-1980s, there's a female British player who's seeded at Wimbledon. Johanna Konta, 16th seed, stormed to the first set against a strong opponent, Monica Puig, taking it 6-1. She was 2-1 up in the second. Guess what happened?
Ladies and gentlemen, play suspended.
There is no roof on court #1 yet. Joe Wilson, BBC News, Wimbledon.
One of Britain's most distinguished artists, David Hockney, presents a new series of portraits at the Royal Academy of Arts in London this week, in which he captures friends, family and acquaintances. Our arts editor Will Gompertz went to meet him at the show.
David Hockney has been busy. In the last 3 years, he's produced these 82 colourful portraits. There's a uniformity to them. They're all the same size, painted in the same LA studio, with the subjects all sitting on the same chair.
As a group, what do you think they tell us?
That we're all individuals. That's what it tells us. That we're different on the outside, we're different on the inside. I think so. Each one took 3 days, really. I mean, it's about a 20-21 hour exposure, that's what I said.
Do you think you're getting better as an artist?
Well, I think so. When you're going deaf, you compensate. I think my vision got better, I think. I was seeing sharper and clearer. And I put that down to the deafness, actually.
This is the first portrait in the series. It depicts the disconsolate figure of J.P. Consalvis de Lima, who, like David Hockney, was devastated by the death of a young assistant at the artist's home in Yorkshire.
That was a terrible shock and a terrible thing. I mean, I didn't do much work for a while. I mean, I drew the garden. But we just started with JP, really.
The exhibition is something of an album featuring David Hockney's inner circle. among whom is Celia Birtwell, a textile designer he's been painting for over 40 years.
Were you surprised with this one?
Well, you can always criticise the way you look. He always says he doesn't paint to flatter, so he paints it for himself. David, can we mention my green nose?
No is clearly the answer, because when it comes to portraiture, the artist always has the last word. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
Well, let's go back to our main story this evening. At least 28 people are now known to have been killed in the suicide bomb attacks at Istanbul's Ataturk International Airport this evening. Our correspondent Mark Lone is on a plane that landed there a few hours ago now. Mark, what more can you tell us?
Sophie, the casualty numbers have dramatically and predictably gone up. 28 dead now, 60 injured. That is what we're being told by the local authorities here, and a confirmation that there were indeed 3 suicide bombers. Initial indications, according to local media and some police reports, are that this was an attack by so-called Islamic State. Now, if that is the case, there will of course be huge political recriminations against President Erdogan. His critics say that the government was too slow to wake up to the threat from IS in Syria and Iraq, and also the IS cells here in Turkey that have struck frequently over the past year. His supporters say IS has struck, of course, around the world, most recently in Brussels and Paris, and you can't really see when this is going to happen, and that really the government is facing multiple terror threats, and the international community needs to stand with it at this time. Of course, Turkey has already seen a huge tourism hit, 45% down across the country, so this country is going to be left reeling from tonight's deadly attack.
Mark Lone on the tarmac there at Istanbul Airport. Thank you. And also, while we've been on air, David Cameron has been speaking after his meeting with EU leaders this evening. He has said he has no regrets over his decision to call a referendum, and he says he threw everything into the Remain campaign. More on that story, of course, on the BBC News channel and on Newsnight, which is underway now on BBC 2, 11 p.m. in Scotland. But now it's time for the news where you are. Good night.